Hi everyone, it's Elo. I hope that you're doing well. In today's video, I am going to be drawing here on our whiteboard, which is a little small, but I think it can work for the purposes of the video today. And I've been feeling kind of tense myself and looking to relax as well. So I have in the background here a little diffuser, which you can see is pulsing through some colors, and it's just going to provide some nice gentle background noise. So I'm going to turn that on now, and you might hear it bubbling a little bit in the background. I find that sound very soothing, and I hope you do as well. So today I wanted to do a video sort of in the style of Draw My Life, which was a popular ASMR trend a number of years ago. Instead, I'm going to do kind of a spin on that. Draw my childhood. In a lot of my videos, I tend to leave in all of the less happy aspects of just being a human being and navigating the world. It's not always incredibly pleasant. So in this video, I kind of wanted to just focus on the good and do something uplifting, nostalgic, and maybe something that will remind you of some of your more fond childhood memories as well. That's not to say everything in my childhood was perfect. As you can tell from some of my other videos, I didn't survive unscathed, and I certainly have things that I wish had gone differently, especially in terms of school and in terms of bullying. However, I did have a very rare and magical sort of experience in the actual neighborhoods that I grew up in. So, for those of you who may not know, I was born in a small state called Connecticut, which is one of the smaller states in the country, in America. And I lived in a really small town within that state as well. There were no large buildings, no skyscrapers, no malls within the zip code that I lived in. Everything was more residential, kind of uniform, nice little trees, and it was pretty. It was a nice little area where I grew up. I was very fortunate for that. When I was first born, my parents lived in a house that was on the corner of the street, right here. And it was cute from what I remember. There was a little basketball goal in the driveway, and since it was a corner lot, just kind of had a lot of charm, and there were really, really big trees surrounding the area. So in the fall, which is my favorite season, there would be leaves scattered everywhere around the property, and I thought it looked really cute and pretty, even though I'm sure it was very annoying for my parents to clean it up. So this is my first memory of a home that I lived in. And oddly enough, I guess, or maybe it says something about me, the place that I remembered more than my actual home was sort of diagonally up on another street nearby. And on this street, which was a cul-de-sac, lived all of my friends at the time. The ones I remember were my friend Emily, who lived around the middle of the street, the DeFeos, who lived closer up towards the top of the street, and most notably, because we hang out there a lot, the Wilsons, who lived at the end of the street in the cul-de-sac. And if I remember correctly, this was called Goldenrod Circle. And here at the Wilsons, we had a lot of fun. They had a hammock in the back that was tied in between two trees. And we used to put one kid in the hammock and spin it like crazy. And the child who was in the hammock would try to hold on to the sort of netting that the hammocks are made out of. So you'd grip your little hands into the netting and hold on for dear life while everyone else would spin you around. And this was one of my first realizations of the fact that I get incredibly motion sick and I do not do well with spinning. It was also at this very hammock that I was first told that if you swallow a stick of chewing gum, it would be in your stomach for 7 years. It wouldn't leave your digestive tract. And I just have a very, very vivid recollection of that for whatever reason. I guess it scared me because while I was on the hammock, I accidentally swallowed my gum. Obviously, it wasn't the safest activity, considering the fact that we were hurling each other around at G-force and potentially choking on gum, but it was a different time. Another thing that we did was in the backyard of the house, there was a large wooden plank deck that ran the length of the house and then just sort of stopped at the end here. And then there was some little grassy area over here, and the trees with the hammock were kind of down here. So we used to find all of our various toys and by way of tricycles and most notably baby strollers. And we would take those strollers or tricycles or whatever vehicle we could find and put one kid in them, and another kid would push as fast as they could down the length of the deck until eventually you just plummet off of the little, maybe 3 to 5 inch drop into the grass. And I think really the thrill of it was just feeling like you were going really, really fast along the length of the deck. But it didn't always end well because sometimes you'd tumble. That's why really we switched to the stroller situation, was because there was a seatbelt. So at least if your transportation dumped at the end, you'd still stay in it relatively unscathed. Eventually we got caught doing that and everyone got sent home to go get yelled at by our respective parents, who received a nice phone call from the Wilsons. There were a lot of fun times in this area, and I certainly never came up with any of the games, but I also wasn't smart enough not to participate. Unfortunately for me, we eventually moved, and I assume it was because my mother was pregnant again. We were having the third child join our family. I have one older brother who was here before me, and then there's me. And then I have two younger brothers who I would draw as shorter than me, but they're not. I am the shortest by far. This is actually not even a good enough depiction of how much taller than me they are. But yeah, so I was the second out of 4 children and the only girl. And when our family was expanding, we moved from that corner lot house to a new neighborhood on the other side of town, which really ended up impacting a lot of my future because our town had 2 middle schools, a handful of elementary schools, and then 1 major public high school. So, had I grown up in the neighborhood I just described, I would have gone to the other middle school and a different elementary school and wouldn't have met any of my neighborhood friends who became my best friends of all. So this neighborhood was really, really cool. I was very, very fortunate to grow up there. This is the main road, which was a 2-lane road that was almost even more dangerous for the fact that our neighborhood was so docile. But this road, the cars would go very, very fast on, so it was really scary to be up that way, and we didn't really venture up that way much. We weren't really allowed to. But further into the neighborhood, this was the whole situation. So this is the busy road where we didn't really go past this point. But all of this was our full neighborhood. And the houses started just a little ways in, but then there were quite a few. all the way around. And not that any of these people even know I make ASMR, but for the sake of their anonymity, I won't give too much information about names. I'm just going to use some first names of the kids I was friends with, and I won't use their last names in case. Even though I feel like we have a lifelong bond, all of us, we don't really talk anymore, so I didn't really get the opportunity to reach out to them and ask if this was okay or anything, so I'd rather be safe than sorry. But this was generally the layout of our neighborhood, and I'll go ahead and circle the important houses. Ooh, this red is not very good. Am I forgetting anyone? I mean, these people were very important to me, but not really a part of the central group that ended up forming. But that's okay. I still loved them just as much. So, this here was my new house. And it was quite nice. Since we were in Connecticut, the amount of land that you get per household is a lot different than, say, if you live in the southern portion of the United States. In the South, it's very common to own acres of land. It's a lot cheaper. If you live in a city, you'll probably have a similar plot size to what you get in the suburbs in a northern area. However, once you move outside of the city, even a little bit in the South, it's pretty common to have 5 to 50 acres of land, depending on who you are and what your family does and all that good stuff. But these houses were probably on about an acre, maybe a little less in some cases. And they were still very nice, though. They were definitely, I would say, maybe middle class homes for the Northeast. Again, if you were to compare that to where I live now, they would probably be upper class or nicer homes comparatively, but that's just the difference in the economy and cost of living between the two places. So the Green Arrow was my home, and this is what I consider to be my true childhood home. I spent most of my time growing up here. I lived here from the time I was about 4 years old, I think, until I was 13. So, the majority of my life. Well, I guess I can't say that anymore, but it feels like the majority of my life was spent in that home. That's definitely the longest I've ever stayed in one place. Up here, when I first moved in, there was a girl who lived here who I really can't even remember her name, but she moved out shortly after. We had moved in and was replaced by my good friend Debbie, who lived there with her family, which was her and her older brother and her mom and dad. And then right next door to Debbie were 3 kids whom I became friends with, all 3 of them. And I think they lived there a little bit longer than Debbie did. It's funny because I actually have a first memory of meeting them after all these years, and it was 1 girl and 2 boys who lived here. The girl and one of the boys were twins, and the other one was their adoptive brother. They were all roughly almost the same age. Actually, their adoptive brother was my age, and they were just a year or so younger than I was. So in the beginning, this was the whole crew. I was playing up here for a while, or hanging around, or maybe there was a tag sale, but either way I remember ending up at the fence line between Debbie's house and the 3 of their house, and we all kind of just met and introduced ourselves. And again, we were very young, probably 5 or 6 years old, but they were my first real friends, outside of the kids that I used to goof around with in the previous neighborhood. And I still talk sometimes with the girl of this family, and more often with Debbie. We've kept in a little bit better touch, but even then, like I said, we don't really talk that much. So we all hung out pretty often. Sometimes my older brother would hang out with us too, but he started getting into a phase where he was kind of too cool for us. So we would all hang out all the time. Eventually, more kids moved in roughly around the same time. My friend Kristen moved into this corner house, and she had an older brother and an older sister. And right across the street on the corner house, Loie moved in. So the 2 of them really hit it off, and I can remember us hanging out on the street and playing Foursquare and hopscotch and waiting for the ice cream truck. And we would often see Kristen and Loie running back and forth to one another's houses, until one day we kind of just hollered out to them and asked if they wanted to play. And they seemed reluctant, but they joined us. And Kristen and Loie were, Kristen was my age and my grade, and Loie was 1 year above us. So the ages all really worked out. And their older brothers sometimes hung out too, because they were roughly the same age. So we got really lucky with that kind of stuff. Later on, down here, 2 more additions, really 4, joined. Melissa, aka Mojo, hung out with us. She lived in the end house here. And then there were 3 boys, 3 brothers, who lived at this house, who also became our friends. But again, there was kind of a little bit of a sub-clique here, because Momo and the boys got along really well, and hung out a lot since they lived right next door. And since we were further down the road, we weren't always seeing them every single day. They played a lot of video games, and the boys had a huge backyard that was really good for playing like ultimate frisbee and soccer, tag, all kinds of stuff. And then Momo's house had a pool. So they were kind of self-contained sometimes, and they had a bit of a bond that none of us really ever broke into that much. But Melissa did become pretty good friends with me, Kristen, and Loie at one point. We had sleepovers and whatnot, and we all considered her just as much of a friend, I think. Kristen and Loie were another little subgroup to a point because they went to the same private school nearby, and the rest of us were public school kids. I actually have no idea where Melissa went to school, and I know the 3 boys went to a different private school even than Kristen and Loie went to. So again, there were these kind of little like tiers, I guess, within the friend group, but as far as I'm aware, we all loved each other just as much. On that same note, I became good friends with families that lived further up the road who had wait, did they have 4 or 3? Yeah, they have 4. So up here, close to the entrance of the neighborhood, were 2 families who, this house and this house, both had a boy in my grade that I was friends with, and that the adoptive brother of this home was friends with as well. So sometimes me and these 3 boys would hang out separately and do the things that we enjoyed. We all had class together, so we had kind of that level of intimacy that we didn't share with the other kids. And this house, as you can see, had a lot of kids. They had 7 kids, and 2 of them were the exact same ages as my 2 younger brothers. So the 4 of them were like a little goon squad of amigos, and they got along really, really well. And in this house, unfortunately, the girl was the one who was the same age, so she wasn't really as much of a part of that group, but we still hung out with her sometimes, and our parents were all kind of friends, I guess. So we had like little parties, or they would have little dinners that they would go to, and we would all hang out as a big group. It didn't really matter how old we were. This house I marked because my older brother's like best neighborhood friend lived here, and he was one of 3 kids, except he was the youngest. So they were kind of like an older family in terms of the neighborhood. So I don't really know his older siblings very well, but I did really love his parents. They were incredibly nice, and he played baseball with my brother, which was something that I was really, really involved with. I guess kind of more out of necessity than anything else. My older brother was very into the baseball, and my dad, that was kind of what they did to bond, and they both loved it. It was like a really magical thing for them. And I just kind of got suckered into that and ended up being a part of that. So I have a lot of good memories of this family through the kind of baseball life, and his parents were just always like the warmest, nicest people, in my opinion. But he really wasn't a part of our group. And then the last notable home was down here, which this was Phil's house. And Phil had a brother who was also one of my brother's ages, but I guess they didn't ever really click that much, probably because my brothers were already such good friends with the kids from this house. But Phil, even though he was a year older than we were, ended up being a major part of our group. So in time, essentially what happened was these 3 kids became like way too cool for us and stopped hanging out with us. These kids were really self-contained, and they were big into soccer, and none of the rest of us, I mean, we played soccer, but more recreationally. They were much more serious. So they were kind of doing their own thing up there. And eventually, Momo moved away, and the boys started hanging out with us less after that point because she was kind of the glue that held them to our group. I think maybe they just didn't feel as comfortable without her, which is understandable. So really, it ended up being Debbie, Kristen, Loie, Phil, and me. That was like the core group at the end. However, in the meantime, we had so much fun, and there were other characters who made appearances. For a while, there was a girl who lived, oh wait, I think she actually lived at this house, who, gosh, I don't remember, her name might have been Madeline, or I'm not even sure, but she had a trampoline, and she really got us onto the trampoline hook. We loved bouncing. Her name was Brianna, something like that. And then someone who became a good friend of mine lived here. Her name was Amber, and she had a trampoline also. And I got along with her really well, more so than the other kids. I think because she was actually like somewhat ASMR inducing for me, but maybe a little weird to the other kids. She believed in like auras and healing and crystals and things, and she had a little bit of a crazy kind of life. They ended up moving away because her dad got in trouble. He was like connected with the mafia or something, actually. I guess that's not funny, but it kind of was at the same time because it just seemed so unassuming. Like, these were people who I had sleepovers and ate pasta and like hung out watching dumb movies with, and it just seemed kind of crazy that he was in a lot of trouble and ended up going to jail, I think, for like embezzlement or something. So that ended up not being the best story, but Amber and I were really good friends while she was there, and I hope that she's doing well now, wherever she is. Let's see. There was also someone who lived here named Jeff who we hung out with sometimes. Trying to think if I'm forgetting anyone, but I think that was mainly it. A lot of the other houses that you can see either had kids that were much younger than us or much older, so they didn't really get along with us or join our group. But considering the fact that we had all of this land to work with, we pretty much had full, complete reign. And since our houses were sort of strategically placed up and down the whole area, someone's mom was always kind of around, and even the older kid, like people who lived there who didn't even have any kids in the area anymore, I think they still kind of looked out for us. And since there was only one way to get in and out of the neighborhood, we really didn't have to worry about any traffic. So the whole neighborhood was kind of just ours to do with whatever we wanted, and we did. We had probably more fun than any other friend group on the planet. In this big old neighborhood, we had a lot of outside and inside games. We played Manhunt, which was fun, and also sometimes we would split up into teams and have walkie-talkies and try to lead each other away from the other group with fake clues and stuff, which was really fun and also really scary because we would cut through the wooded areas a lot, through people's backyards and little creeks, and you just never knew when you were gonna run into somebody. We played Foursquare. We played wall ball. Of course, we played basketball a lot. We rode our bikes, and then one summer those bikes were scooters, and another summer they were rollerblades. I don't think any of us were ever really allowed to have a skateboard, but we definitely got around a lot, and there were some soft hills throughout the neighborhood, but it was mainly flat, so it was really easy to just kind of ride everywhere and anywhere, and like I said, we didn't really have to worry about traffic, so that was super nice. We also bounced on the trampolines, like I said, and we would play run the bases. And sometimes we would play like just a hopscotch or dang, I don't remember. Oh, it's called a skip it. This little thing that you'd put around your ankle and try to jump over it every time that it circled around your foot. And we would always be trying to best each other and everything just for fun. And then inside we played, like when it was raining, we would play like Pit, which is a little kind of, I guess it's a board game technically. It's like a trading market that's super fun when you have like a rambunctious, loud group of people to play with. We played a lot of Kirby Adventures on N64, just N64 in general. We played like racing games, we played Army Men, Sarge's Heroes, we played Diddy Kong Racing and Mario Party, Mario Kart, just everything. Pretty much between all of us, we had like all the games that you could want. We kind of all asked for different stuff for holidays and whatnot, and ended up with a really good collection between all of us. We would make videos, like music videos and short skits. And we had like an old camcorder, so we would record like movies essentially. We really just didn't care. We tried everything and anything we thought would be fun. There was one game, I forget what it was called, but it was played in the dark, and essentially in someone's basement you'd have people who were set up to kind of scare you, and you'd have to like navigate through the basement and make it all the way without, I don't know, peeing your pants or something. It was like a Marshmallow Man game that we created where one person would be like in a sleeping bag or something but standing upright. I still don't really know what the point of that game was. We also played a lot of like just random board games, Monopoly. We played a lot with Hot Wheels. And Barbies. And other dolls. eventually they had from American Girl doll, they had these like tiny roomscapes that were in like essentially a big shadow box, and you would set up all the little stuff in the room however you wanted it to be. And that was cool. But we all had different interests, and we were able to enjoy all of those things together. It seemed like everyone had a different idea of what was fun, and so there were a lot of games to go around. One of my favorite parts of my entire childhood were night games. Night games were, again, neighborhood-wide games that we played. And obviously we played them at night. So whenever it would get dark out, this was something that we were only really allowed to do in the summer because we didn't have school. So after we all got done with dinner at our respective houses, or sometimes at each other's house, but usually at our own homes, we would be summoned for dinner, and everyone would eat as fast as they could, and we'd go back out and meet up on the street together and decide what we were going to play for night games, and we'd get as many kids involved as we could. And one of the ones that we really liked to play was kick the can. And you know, we had people who were living on those corner lots, so it was perfect because you could run all the way around the house. We also played like keep away and tackle football, touch football, like I said earlier, ultimate frisbee, all that kind of stuff. But night games were always the most fun because there was just an added element of, I guess, like sneakiness and just being out late and feeling like we could do anything. And when you're playing hide and go seek, it's like way more intense when it's in the dark. And I think this was another time where I really felt in tune with my sort of ASMR side, similar to the bubbling noise of a diffuser. There are a lot of very pretty and light sounds that you hear at night when you're trying to be really still and hide. You can hear crickets chirping and certain bird calls, and just the kind of settling of night over the area. It really makes for kind of a palpable sort of calm that always would make me feel really tingly whenever we were trying to be really quiet and whispering in the dark. Another couple things that we did. So I'm going to kind of show two different areas here. This was down at Mojo Momo's end of the woods. Down this hill was a Christmas tree farm. So you may have noticed earlier when I drew her cul-de-sac, I didn't put a house at that kind of really corner position because there was not one. There was just a large hill and some woods that led right on down to this tree farm, which was actually owned by the people who lived in the next cul-de-sac up. here you would have seen on the other map as well that I didn't draw more than one house. There wasn't a house next to it until my brother's friend's house, because these people were actually the ones who sort of initially owned the whole land area, the whole plot that became our neighborhood. And they had kept a large chunk and some other parcels for themselves. This was where they actually lived, which had a back entrance into our neighborhood, but the front of their house was actually in a different neighborhood. And here they had a small farm with a few horses that I actually got to work with and tend to earlier in my life, which was a lot of fun. So these people owned this land down here and decided to make it into this little Christmas tree farm. But before the trees grew big, this was like our favorite hill to sled on when it snowed. So we would all meet up, walk down the street together like a band of hooligans, and bring our inflatables and our plastic sleds and just go cruising down this hill, which was very steep and not exactly very safe. I guess a lot of what I did in my childhood wasn't technically safe, but it was fun. We had such a good time. And once we actually even met some kids down here who were building a gigantic snowman who had come from another nearby neighborhood. So that was kind of weird because we were like, get out. What are you doing here? But it was also kind of cool to realize that there was a world beyond ours, and that it wasn't so far away. So that was one really fun thing to do in the winter. And the other kind of fun wintertime activity would take place behind my house. So if this is my house here, it had a backyard that was level with the house itself. Okay. And then there was a fence here at the end of it, because this is still our kind of property. It went down and there was a steep drop off that kind of had like a terrace and then another steep drop off. So this was all habitable backyard, as you would really consider a backyard. But then after this point, there was just a harsh drop off to the rest of the land, and eventually there was a pond down at the very bottom. So you could go around the side of the house and walk down. You could traverse the area, and eventually my parents hired someone to make it even more flat and manageable. But down here at the end, off to the side, was the beginning of a patch of woods that ran literally the length of the street that I lived on. So this is my road. And this is my house. Here, all the way, there was just woods. Way down. And what we would do was find a tree close to the beginning of the wooded area, and we would take a big ball of yarn and we would tie the beginning to the tree, and carry it with us and let it unravel as we made our way through the woods so we could figure out how to get back home. And it was so much fun. It was like intense exploration. And the truth of the matter was that there was another road down here that had another neighborhood. But we didn't really know that at the time. So it seemed like we were literally in the middle of nowhere and like no one could find us if we got lost. So it was fun to walk through and feel like, exploration, navigation experts, and to have this roll of yarn, making our trail as to where we'd been and how we were going to get back. And sometimes it would be feet and feet and feet of snow. But at the first time we ever did this, it wasn't really fully winter yet. So there was still a lot of tree coverage, and that's really what gave us the impression of being in the middle of nowhere. But once it became the dead of winter and we went back, we were able to see kind of up to the backs of everyone's house, and we could see down to the road where this other foreign neighborhood was. And actually a girl who I went to school with named Liz lived in that neighborhood, and one time we were rummaging through the woods and we saw her and some of her friends walking on the road, and that was a very funny meetup because I think it really shattered our illusion of being exploring in the middle of nowhere because we were running into like classmates. But it was fun nonetheless, and we still did it just about every year. We would go down there with a ball of yarn, and really we would bring 5 or 6 massive balls of yarn so that we could go as far as we could. And that was a lot of fun too. And this was really when the whole group was still together. In time, though, as I said, all good things change, and we broke down to our smaller group, which again was Debbie, me, Chloe, Kristen, and Phil. And this was like the more, older, more contemplative group. And by this point in time, it was kind of an interesting situation for me because I had been going through all that bullying at school, where I was at school with Debbie, even though she was a grade above me. So I left that school and actually ended up going to the same school as Loie and Kristen for 1 year, my 8th grade year. And Kristen and I were in the same class, and Loie was in the class above us. So she had graduated by the time I got there. But Kristen and I became really close because we saw each other literally every day for school. And then Phil was back at the public school in the same grade as Debbie. Phil, Loie, and Debbie were the same age, and Kristen and I were the same age, so we all had our kind of connections to one another, and we were all kind of going through the same things, so that was really comforting. We weren't necessarily the most popular kids, but we didn't consider ourselves losers, I don't think, either. At least I didn't. I mean, these were my favorite people in the world, and I thought everything of them. But I think we were all just a little more alternative, whatever that's supposed to mean. So we would hang out at this pond that we really didn't explore until kind of the main group had fallen away. So if you remember that this is the neighborhood like this, down here where Phil lived, there was a cut through to a park, and really the main park was kind of farther away, and it was like a legitimate swing set having park. But in between here and there was like just a naturescape, I guess. There was a large pond and a lot of woods all around it in all directions, and there were some really cool paths and just all kinds of stuff. But this big pond was really where we would hang out, but only on this one side of it. So we decided to explore a little bit one day. This kind of looks like a Krabby Patty. And we found a place that ended up being our spot. So we came just a little ways into the woods here, and in between some trees, looking out onto this amazing lake, there was just a little footbridge that had a railing, and it was kind of shoddy, not very well constructed, but we would stand and we would look out onto the lake at all hours of the day. We would go there whenever we could. During the summer, we hung out there all the time. We would watch the sunset there before and after dinner. Just year-round, that became really our main spot. And the water actually came through a little bit, but it was like really murky in this area. And there were some rocks, and I'll never forget, Kristen had gotten a brand new pair of white, like stark white Pumas shoes, and she decided to try to like jump from rock to rock while wearing them, and she completely ate shit and ruined her shoes completely, which was sad. She also, at a later point in time when we were exploring the woods beyond, which were somewhere over here, we found like a rope swing, kind of. It was just a rope, and there was a large rock where you could go and grab the rope and kind of swing. Like if this was the rock, that's a terrible rock, but whatever. This is the rock, you can climb up it, stand here, grab this rope, and swing out, and then swing back. Well, a couple of the kids did it, and I, by this point, was terrified of anything that might hurt me, courtesy of my parents. And Kristen decided to swing on the rope, and she yelled something like, "I'm Tarzan," and the rope, I guess, I don't remember if it broke or she just slipped, but she ended up on the ground, and we knew immediately that something was wrong. I don't think I had ever really seen her cry in my life of like 10 years plus of knowing her. And she was like screaming like, "My ankle, my ankle." So we were all like trying to look at her ankle and see what was going on. And then she was like, "No, I mean my wrist, my wrist." And yeah, we had to walk her home, and she was really shaken up, and she had somehow broken her wrist in the way that she had fallen. And just like any of us would have been, she was terrified that her mom was going to be livid, which she was. That was not a good day for us as a group, but it started off fun, and it definitely didn't stop us from going back to our spot, although we never rope swang ever again. Yeah, she just had bad luck for some reason in that forest, but we all loved it, and we all kind of just learned to talk in this space that was really safe, I guess. No one ever really bothered us. Only maybe a handful of times did anyone walk by. And even though my drawing doesn't really show it, there were actually like tree coverage really close to where we were. We were almost kind of looking out through some like branches. So it felt very private. And the truth was that we weren't very far from other people. We weren't far from our neighborhood or the park or people in general. But we just felt so safe. We felt miles away from everyone else in our little spot here, and it really provided like the perfect spot for us to talk and learn about each other and learn about just life and see things through each other's eyes and talk about the problems that we were having. You know, not that anyone has that many problems when they're 13 or 14 years old, but it's a very important time for your personal and social growth. And I feel very fortunate that I had these friends and this place where we could bounce ideas off each other and help each other when things were feeling overwhelming and difficult. I don't really think any of us got that from our families for different reasons. We all had our own sort of issues with our families, or rather, our families all had their own issues, and they were just very different people from one another. Our households were very different, and our perspectives were very different, and I was just very, very fortunate to be able to have this group that could really talk about everything and anything and not feel judged and not feel worried that someone was gonna think we were stupid. Like, we had grown up together, we loved each other, we had laughed so much together, we were just really there for each other. And I know that not everyone gets to have that same experience that I had. So as much as I can gripe about or just reflect on issues that I might have faced growing up, especially in my home, I also had this amazing escape that helped me get through it all. And it was magical to be just out there with my friends, playing games. And even when I was by myself, you know, in the mornings when I would wake up before school, I would often get on my bike and just drive through the 4 cul-de-sacs. And eventually later in my life, I ended up writing a lot of poetry about these experiences too, because they just stuck with me that much, and I felt very in tune with nature and just the world. I didn't have the same anxieties and ridiculous worries and fears that I have now. I just lived, and I just connected with everything, the plants and the bees and the birds and the chipmunks and squirrels, and just all of it was magical to me. And I guess I have a renewed sense of that lately, but it's never really hit that same crest that it was in when I was growing up. And I think that if we look back, most of us have something like that that really helped us get through. So, if any of my neighborhood friends ever do see this, I hope that you all know that you were a huge part of not just who I became, but why I loved where I lived and why I enjoyed being alive. And I definitely haven't forgotten all of the amazing things that we experienced together. I feel like a lot of it was idyllic, and that's kind of a weird thing to say, especially since now, of all of the kids that I mentioned in the whole neighborhood, like I said, most of them I don't talk to. One of them became highly addicted to drugs, and one of them has passed away, and one of them travels the world. I really have no idea what she's doing. Another one is a teacher and kind of followed the exact path that we expected. Another one is like an indie filmmaker and also travels the world and just lives this crazy life. And a lot of them I just don't even know where they are, though, or what they're doing. And they were such a core part of who I became, who I am. So I'm gonna draw the obligatory draw my life hearts. I feel like everyone who has done a draw my life included a heart somewhere. So there we go. And in case you're wondering, the years that I was really talking about there would have been about this period of time. I was born in 1990, and I moved away in like 2003, December of 2003, I think it was. So those 13 years of my life were basically what I just recapped, and I hope that you enjoyed this. I guess learning a little more about me and where I'm from and how I grew up. Again, I just tried to focus on mainly the positive of things, but I think that's a good exercise to do sometimes too. Stop thinking about the negative all the time and really focus on what was good and what did go right. There's nothing wrong with that, and I think it helps you heal and helps you realize who you are. So if any of you have any stories that you want to share from your own childhood, or any games that you and your friends used to play, I'm sure I have 1,000 more that I could list if I really thought about it. I'd love to hear. Feel free to leave me a message in the comments, and I will see you in my next video.